Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, caffeine-loving, portal-patrolling, playoff-advancing YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and its stroll into history. I'm Eric Hansen, still in my TV clothes. He's Tyler James, trapped in a snow globe somewhere. We're the co-publishers, co-editors, and co-everything else's of Inside ND Sports. On tonight's show, we'll put in perspective the latest hit to Notre Dame's off-hit defensive line and assess what Plan B will look like and how effective it might be when the 7-seed Irish clash with number 2 seed Georgia January 1 in New Orleans in the college football playoff quarterfinals. We'll have an early rundown of the Bulldogs, who have a big lineup replacement to make of their own. Multitask like a champion, Marcus Freeman is doing that with his second commitment of an incoming transfer portal this season. We've got the latest on recruiting and, of course, comments, questions. Start filling up the queue. This is
all right. We are just hours away from Christmas Eve, and some of you still might have some shopping to do. And if a Notre Dame fan is still on your list, we have a simple solution for you: a gift subscription to InsideNDSports.com. You can sign up for gift subscriptions from 1 month up to 5 years. You can do so at NotreDame.rivals.com/gifts/purchase. And I've included the link in the video description below so you don't have to type all that out. There's also a big headline at the top of our homepage that you can't miss. And if you want to get a first-time subscription for yourself, you can sign up for a 30-day free trial of your own with promo code NDYT. There's a link in the video description below for that as well. And then lastly, before we get to our Notre Dame topics, please make sure you're subscribed to us here on YouTube. It's free, just costs you a click, and it lets you get comments and questions in during the show. So please demolish the like button as well. And that should be it for all the plugs we have for now. Let's get on to the show. We have plenty to discuss today. A busy day with the Marcus Freeman press conference earlier. We're going to start with injury news. We received a loaded injury report from Marcus Freeman. First, the bad news is defensive tackle Riley Mills is out for the season with a knee injury he suffered in the Indiana game. Eric, how big of a blow is this for Notre Dame?
There's not enough adjectives. I mean, it's not the end of the season, but Riley Mills is the guy that you really wanted to have against Georgia. He's a leader in sacks with 7.5, leader in tackles for loss with 8.5, tied for the lead in quarterback hurries with 4, the leading defensive lineman with tackles, 37, and the leader in snaps among all defensive linemen with 539. So what does Plan B look like? That measures how big this loss is. I think Gabe Rubio is a good Plan B. He's played 181 snaps. He's been in the high 20s and low 30s the last 3 games. But that's a big difference in terms of impact. And then you get down to Armel Mucum in the next level down. He would be the rotational player, a sophomore who's played 60 snaps. And then you start to feel the gravity of what this loss can mean. But Notre Dame has been able to pull it together at other positions. We'll see if they can do it at the defensive tackle position.
Yeah, it feels like a massive loss to me. Riley was Notre Dame's most consistently disruptive player on the defensive line. Now, I think Howard Cross can be that. He hasn't been able to do that this season in part because of injuries. Will he be able to do that against Georgia? We will see. He certainly played plenty against IU. Al Golden wasn't joking about getting him out there as much as he could.
54 snaps.
So we'll see how much more of a role Howard Cross is asked to play in creating some disruption, what they can do with Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Heinisch. Armel Mucum, it's hard to imagine them going too much farther beyond those guys, but
right. That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, the next guy would be maybe Sean Sevano Jr., who's played a handful of snaps, a true freshman. It's hard.
Because they have more depth, I think, at nose tackle than defensive tackle right now. So maybe at least maybe guys that it seem like they have played or they like. So maybe they move Heinisch and or Cross to playing some more defensive tackle to get maybe those guys in at nose tackle to try to change things up so you're not leaning on Rubio as much. It'll be interesting to see what sort of game plan Notre Dame comes up with in terms of the rotations. But I think they're going to have to rely heavily on those guys at the top, which it's thin. None of those guys are Riley Mills. He is a crucial part of Notre Dame's defense, and it's such a bummer that this is how he goes out with Notre Dame in the middle of a special run. All right, Notre Dame also has 4 players listed as questionable for the Sugar Bowl. Right guard Rocco Spindler with a right ankle, a linebacker Kingston Viliamu-Asa with a right knee, wide receiver KK Smith with a collarbone, and linebacker Bodie Cahoon with a right lower leg injury. Let's talk about Spindler first. Can Notre Dame afford to play against Georgia without a healthy offensive line?
Well, I think if Rocco can't go, then Sam Pendleton is the starter there, and then you do have a healthy offensive line. Is this as good as with Rocco Spindler? I don't think so, but is it a big step down? I don't think it's a huge step down. Sam Pendleton's played a lot of football this year. Now he's played at a different spot. We have the starting right guard at the beginning of the year is now the starting left guard, and the starting left guard at the beginning of the year may be the starting right guard in the biggest game of the season. But you would love to have Rocco Spindler healthy and at his best because he's playing some of his best football. But I think that situation is much less of a concern than what you're dealing with Riley Mills.
Yeah, I would agree, although how much less I think could be debated. I think Georgia can be more disruptive than it has been. You just look at the Texas games, and Texas being one of the 3 finalists for the Joe Moore Award. Georgia gave Texas fits in terms of rushing, in terms of getting after the quarterback, in terms of rush defense. I think they ran for 60 yards total in those 2 games on over 55 carries. And now obviously that's in part because of the sacks that Georgia got. They got 13 sacks in those 2 games combined, I believe. So I think Georgia could give Notre Dame problems. Sam Pendleton has had good moments for Notre Dame this season. He's had some bad moments. So maybe with a clear runway to prepare for an opportunity, certainly if Rocco Spindler is trying to test himself, there will be some reps split there. But with going into a game knowing you may start is a lot different than knowing you're going to be a backup, even though Marcus Freeman sort of says pretty constantly that Notre Dame's depth has been able to step up because those guys are preparing as if they're starters. So that'll certainly be tested if Sam Pendleton has to play instead of Rocco Spindler. Another thing as it relates to Georgia, Kristen Miller, who's their best defensive tackle, arguably, maybe not arguably, depending on someone that knows more about Georgia than me. He has been missing time with an injury, but he could be back to play some role against Notre Dame. And you especially need your center and guards on the same page, and playing with a lot of power going against someone like Kristen Miller.
Yeah, one thing I will mention about Texas when you brought up that example, and Texas is really a good team. They're very good on defense, but they are one of the worst rushing offenses in the field. They're one of the worst teams at protecting their passer. Notre Dame is the opposite. They're near the top of both.
So why were they a Joe Moore Award finalist?
I'm not sure. You'd have to ask the people that did that. The 1 year Iowa won, they gave up a lot of sacks, and it may be, again, what
the quarterback's fault.
It could be, and the quarterback's going back and forth. But I mean, that's how. I mean, when you look at them statistically, I mean, I'm not making up those stats.
Right. No, I understand.
Yeah. Texas was 64th in the country in rush offense. Notre Dame is 10th. Texas is 71st in sacks allowed. Notre Dame is 24th coming into the playoff. So you look at Georgia in some other games, and we're going to get to this a little bit later.
Right.
The games that they had trouble were the games they got outrushed, and they got pounded in a lot of games. In the games that were close, Kentucky and Georgia Tech ran all over them. UMass ran all over them. But in their 2 losses, they got doubled up on the rushing total. So they haven't been able to shut everybody's rushing attack down. The thing about Georgia that's scary is they have the talent that they can have these huge peaks, and they've been in big games all year. So this is going to be nothing new for them.
All right. Getting back to some of the other injured guys, Kingston Viliamo-Asa, what would his return mean for Notre Dame's defense?
I think I think you feel his presence as far as reps when Notre Dame plays less nickel, like in the games where they play 3 linebackers part of the game. You see his reps higher, but there's 2 things that I really like that he does that a healthy version of him would bring. One is pass rush. He's, I think, Notre Dame's best pass rushing linebacker. He has the best pass rushing moves. And I think he's one of the better linebackers in coverage. He just covers a lot of field, and just adding his athleticism back into the mix, I think would be a lift for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's another linebacker who can rush the passer, and I think Notre Dame's going to have to get creative with Riley Mills out to pressure Georgia quarterback Gunnar Stockton, who is now officially the starter because Carson Beck was ruled out with a surgery on his elbow that was announced within the last couple hours. But we have been known for a while now that Gunnar Stockton would be starting for Georgia. It's just a bit of a formality seemingly now. So yeah, it would be nice to see if Kingston can get back. That would be quite the recovery from the state that I saw him walking in out at USC on Thanksgiving weekend, with a pretty stabilized leg. But he is a versatile piece of Notre Dame's defense, and I think the more you have of those, the better off you are.
Until I got reminded today via text from somebody that lives in Atlanta, and I bet you can guess who. I forgot Jayden Rashada was on their roster this year because he hasn't played.
Yeah. All right. Last injury note: the Irish are set to have one previously injured player available, and that's offensive lineman Charles Jagusah. He will be practicing full goal this week with a role still to be determined, per Marcus Freeman. Do you think that Notre Dame needs Charles, and what's the best use of him in the playoff?
I think if you had the version of him that had never tore the right pectoral muscle, he certainly could help them in this game. I mean, healthy and experienced and having played a whole season, he's one of their 5 best, whether you play him at tackle or guard. But given how much time he's missed, I think we're looking at him building momentum for 2025. It doesn't seem realistic that you would want to put him in a position where he would be playing where he hasn't played any games and he's playing next to people that he hasn't practiced very much with for the last few months. But I think it's encouraging that he's coming back and that he's in your holster. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would probably prefer him to be a sort of break in case of emergency guy.
Right.
That doesn't seem like a very easy transition to finally practicing full goal on December 23rd or 24th, whatever the first full practice that he does is. And then trying to play January 1st against Georgia. Regardless of what the stats say about Georgia, their defensive linemen are not easy to block. And so you're really getting thrown to the wolves in that situation. Maybe there's some special things they can do with him. If they feel better about Sam Pendleton if he's rotating in and out. I don't know. That hasn't been anything that Notre Dame has done this season, but we did see Joe Rudolph try to experiment with that last year at Louisville, and it went horribly. So I would not be in favor of that, but I think it's just good news to see him back out there. I'm still a bit skeptical of what sort of impact he will have for Notre Dame in the immediate future. But certainly it's helpful to have someone like that available if necessary. All right, let's get into some transfer portal news from today, and then we'll hop into some of the questions folks have been submitting. Thank you for everyone chiming in. We got a nice crowd here tonight. The news of the day was Virginia wide receiver Malachi Fields committed to graduate transfer to Notre Dame. Fields is 6'4", 220 pounds. He was a captain for Virginia this past season and led the Cavaliers with 55 catches for 808 yards and 5 touchdowns, which was pretty similar to his production he had in the 2023 season as well. Eric, how big of a need is Fields filling for Notre Dame?
I think a huge need with a really nice production. Notre Dame will lose Beaux Collins, who's its leading receiver after the season to expired eligibility. They may lose the next 2 guys on the depth chart, depending on what they want to do with their 5th year, and that's Jayden Thomas and Deion Colsey, who are also boundary receivers. Then Micah Gilbert is the young boundary receiver, and then you have freshmen. So having a guy that steps in that has better numbers the last 2 years than your starter Beaux Collins had this year, I think is pretty impressive. And the thing that I like about it, Tyler, and I know you're going to ask me about this, is what's good about those numbers being over 50 catches and being over 800 yards and having 5 touchdowns. I mean, unlike Chris Mitchell, you don't have to translate those numbers. He played against 3 college football playoff teams this year,
Right,
including Notre Dame. He had good games against all 3 of them. And you look at the competition that Virginia has played without an elite quarterback the last couple years, and he's put up those kind of numbers with that kind of attention from defenses. I think Notre Dame should feel pretty excited about getting a guy like him. Now, he wasn't a big star guy coming out of high school, 2 stars out of Charlottesville, Monticello High School. But what I like, Tyler, is I always like these track guys. He was a state finalist in the 200, the 4x4, long jump, high jump, shot put, discus, triple jump.
That's a busy day.
That is a busy day. A lot of state associations won't let you do more than 3 or 4 events, but that he was able to qualify in all those. His best finish, I think, was 3rd in the high jump.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to throw a couple stats that I pulled off of PFF as it relates to Malachi Fields. He had 10 contested catches on 23 targets this past season, which is a 43.5% catch rate. That's as many as Jayden Greathouse and Beaux Collins had this season combined, and those were the 2 top receivers in terms of contested catches for Notre Dame. They did both have higher catch rates than Fields. Greathouse is at 83.3, and Collins is 55.6. Collins, as I'm sure everyone who's watched Notre Dame football knows, has had some issues with drops. He's had 7 drops. Fields only had 2 this past season, and obviously was targeted more than Beaux Collins has been. So the fact that he only had 2 drops is a pretty impressive stat. And I think fills a need there, because even if both Jayden Thomas and Deion Colsey were coming back, those guys have not been nearly as productive as Fields has been in his college career. And I think you feel pretty good about taking a shot on him and seeing how he fits in.
Okay, let me ask you this, Tyler. Who in the class that was just signed that Notre Dame missed on it as a wide receiver was a boundary guy, and how would Fields compare to a freshman version of one of those players?
I mean, I think Derek Meadows could have been eventually. He's big,
right?
But he's also fast. But
Notre Dame's had fast guys into the boundary before, Claypool and Miles Boykin, and
and Meadows has not been the most prolific high school player. He certainly is a good athlete, and that's what got him so much attention. So yeah, I mean, I think I would, if you're saying who would you rather have in 2025, Malachi Fields or Derek Meadows, I think you take Fields. But obviously the upside of having someone for more than 1 year is what you'd prefer. That's why Notre Dame wants to live in recruiting world and then sort of complement with the transfer portal world. But the guys that Notre Dame signed, Bettis would be Jerome Bettis Jr. would be a likely boundary receiver too. He's got some size to him. And I think the others probably aren't boundary receivers. The others being Elijah Burris and Tavius Richardson.
What's his nickname? Because nobody calls him Antavius now.
Scrap.
Okay,
Scrap Richardson. That. Yeah, that one wasn't new to me. I did not know that was his nickname until Notre Dame started promoting him as such.
It's a good thing he's not related to Ian Book. Then he would be Scrapbook. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
In terms of the wide receiver transfers, you touched on it a little bit. Do you think he is better than the previous wide receiver transfers that Notre Dame has landed?
In just this last class, or all of them all time?
I'm not sure that the list is very long, but
there were some bad ones.
Right. Yeah. They're not the ones that you would probably want to compare him to. So
remember, there was a Cam Smith, and there was I can't remember the other guys.
Freddie Canteen.
Freddie Canteen. What a great story, and what a very below average receiver. So you're mostly comparing him to Beaux Collins. I think Beaux Collins is a really, really good athlete in terms of being able to test well, vertical jump and so forth. And I think he's been good for Notre Dame. I think I like the potential of this guy better. So we'll see. I mean, I looked through all his game logs. He missed a bunch of games his sophomore year. That's why he has a fifth year, because he had a broken foot his sophomore year and barely played.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you look at the last 2 years and how consistent he was. And it wasn't like, he had 18 catches against Richmond and then 1 against Clemson. I mean, he was pretty consistent against everybody. And 4 for 81 as a boundary receiver against who Notre Dame has playing in the boundary at cornerback. I think that's impressive. I'm optimistic. I need to see more, but on first glance, I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, Brian Habermill, excuse me. Brian Habermill said can't spell his name, Northwestern kid. That would be Ben Skoranek. So that Skoranek would probably be towards the high end of guys that were successful transfer receivers for Notre Dame.
And Brian Habermill, thank you for the email. I did read that, and you are as smart as I thought you were.
All right. Related to Malachi Fields, we'll start getting into some questions here. Mike DeVoy says, boundary receiver position is flushed with talented receivers. Is this an indication that 1 or 2 have told the coaches they're going into the portal after the CFP?
I mean, it might be, but I mean, he's a guy that would, I think, start ahead of at least Deion Colsey, if not also Thomas. And the kid isn't going to come to Notre Dame if he doesn't think the opportunity's there for him to earn that starting spot. So, I think Marcus is, as long as guys have their degrees, he's okay with somebody seeking more playing time elsewhere. I think Notre Dame would love to have Jayden Thomas back another year and have that cushion with Micah Gilbert coming up, having a little buffer until Micah comes all the way around. But it could be, but we'll find out soon enough here. And let's talk about the portal situation real quick for people that aren't up on it. The transfer portal closes Saturday, at the end of the day Saturday. However, the teams that are in the playoff, the 8 teams that remain, and anybody that plays a bowl game after December 28th, as soon as that team is no longer playing, there's a new 5-day window for the players on that team to go into the portal. There's also something with coaching changes. We won't talk about that and cloudy the picture. But so after Notre Dame gets eliminated, whether that's in this round, whether they win the national championship on January 20th, there will be a 5-day window.
Yeah. It's always important to remember, like, that's just the entry. It's not like when those decisions have to be made in terms of guys that are going to their next school. It's just the guys that want to get into the portal have to follow those entry rules. You can transfer to the next school sort of whenever you want. Obviously, the academic calendar brings some constraints to that in terms of making a decision and where you want to go. So, but guys could even like enter the transfer portal now and decide to stay at their school for the spring and finish out that academic year, and then eventually transfer. That some guys that even came to Notre Dame did that last year. So,
and that's why I asked Marcus today about the balancing the transfer portal, because he really, really wants the emphasis to be on this playoff game. And yet the reality is he can't sit on his hands until after Notre Dame is out of the playoff to host players and recruit players So he has to do a little multitasking.
Yeah, and Frank Sarah says, Merry Christmas to you all. My question is, will Notre Dame announce more transfer commitments this week?
What do you think, Tyler?
I don't think so. I mean, there could be. I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's not Notre Dame announcing the transfer commitments. I think Notre Dame, if it had its way, would keep everything under wraps until its season's over. But obviously, there are folks who want to announce their decisions, and
they have agents who want them to announce their decisions.
Yeah, but Malachi today, he announced his publicly. It wasn't like something that was leaked to reporters.
Right.
It doesn't seem. It seems like more than a coincidence that after the bad news of Riley Mills came today, that there was some good news to go on top of that with Malachi Fields announcing his commitment to Notre Dame. I'll just say that. So there is certainly coordinating in terms of announcements. So I don't know that this week makes a ton of sense, like more sense to do that, especially around the holiday, like let people enjoy their holiday. But maybe that's me as a reporter who doesn't want to cover any of that around the holiday. But
like a high school offensive lineman announcing on Christmas Eve day,
following in the footsteps of Troy Pride Jr. All right, let's get to some more questions here. Bob Oxnard says, Merry Christmas, guys. Can RJ Oben move inside to give Rubio rest? And number two, what did you think of Chris Salerno potentially saving a touchdown by knocking the guy out of bounds after the blocked field goal?
Okay. I think, I was thinking about this today. Is there any of the defensive ends that you could move inside or that could do double duty? I think the guy that probably fits that best is Josh Burnham. And yet they're so thin at Viper. They're so thin at field end. I mean, he's already a backup at the field end too. I don't know that that's super realistic other than, I'll use Tyler's terminology, break glass emergency kind of thing about moving one of the defensive ends. What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know that Notre Dame has enough depth at defensive end that it can afford to do that. On
passing downs, you may kick somebody inside, because you bring a linebacker down to do the Viper. But
you could, and because someone's going to need to play Riley Mills's role as a pass rusher, and I don't think Gabriel Rubio is that guy, like in like third down situations. And so maybe you see the defensive end doing that, and I think some of that is just like Riley Mills' skill set allowed for him to do what a defensive end was often asked to do. And so maybe that responsibility goes back to defensive ends a little bit more. But I don't necessarily see that being a successful formula for Notre Dame and or RJ Oben himself. So I think they'll continue to lean on the guys that they've been training at that position until it gets to a worse situation where maybe that presents them needing to do that. What do you think of Salerno?
I thought it was awesome. I thought it was Tyler Buckner until I realized it was Salerno. They didn't change that. So I thought that was I know that Bob actually mentioned that they know the Salerno family. So this is a big deal. So I'm going to say it was freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's so you looked it up. It's still officially listed as a Tyler Buckner tackle in the stats?
Yeah, I'm going to double check and make sure it didn't get changed to the last.
I know it got announced in the press box as Tyler Buckner on the tackle. And we were like, wait a minute, that's not
you
Tyler
keep
Buckner.
Talking and I'll look this up.
So, I will go on to another question from Brian Habermel. Jordan Faison seemed to have his best roles in the IU game, run after the catch, go deep at angles like over and corner routes. I think the Irish are missing that big guy who wins 50-50. What say you? Yeah, I would agree with that, Brian. I think Beaux Collins can be that and has been that at times. He hasn't been that enough consistently lately. I think that was the hope for him, and maybe he finds something, or Notre Dame finds something in him to do that this playoff stretch run. I think Mitchell Evans is also that kind of guy. I mentioned the contested catches earlier. Evans actually has the most on the team with 6. but he's not a receiver, wide receiver, so I didn't mention him when I was discussing Malachi Fields. And that's a pretty impressive number for Evans because he wasn't necessarily playing all the time or fully healthy the whole season, and that isn't necessarily surprising because we know that Mitchell Evans is good at something like that.
So it was Salerno. It's still Salerno, so good for him.
All right. Let's see. Scott Fegan says, will ND blitz more this week?
It would seem like you would guess that, given that Riley Mills is the number one guy with sacks, and you're also playing a quarterback that's not used to starting. But I think you want to mix things up. I think that's the best way to slow down Tyler Stockton, is to confuse him so that you're not constantly blitzing. And you also got to get them into third and unfavorable positions, which, again, if their rushing attack isn't on top of things, then I think you can do that. But Riley Mills was such a big part of creating those third and long situations too. So my bottom line, Scott, after I danced through your question, is yes, I think they will blitz more, but not ridiculously. And they will never use, again, the safety blitz from Ohio State game in Columbus, where the safety started in the parking lot.
I'm going to stop this so it doesn't become a habit. You said Tyler Stockton when Notre Dame is not trying to rush
Gunner Stockton,
the former Notre Dame defensive tackle and current Boise State co-defensive coordinator Tyler Stockton. So that made me chuckle. But yeah, I think Notre Dame will mix in his blitzes. Blitzing is a very big part of what Al Golden has done with Notre Dame's defense, so it wouldn't be abnormal for Notre Dame to blitz a good amount. So I think that will continue to happen. But yeah, the unpredictability of where the blitzes are coming from, the frequency of the blitzes, those are all things that will play in Notre Dame's favor, and something that you want to try to do against a first-time starter at quarterback.
I'm going to start calling you Gunner, James.
All right.
No more Tylers.
Joe Peters says, who can step up I assume that's referred to Riley Mills, force inexperienced Georgia quarterback into bad throws. Watts is incredible. Let him make plays.
Well, I agree with your assessment of Watts. I think that he is a big reason why Notre Dame is this far in the playoff, and I think he's a big reason why Notre Dame has a chance to advance beyond this particular round. Who can step up? I mean, it's not all on Rubio and Mucom to make up that production. You're going to need better production out of your defensive ends. You're going to need Howard Cross to look like the Howard Cross at the top of his game. Donovan Heinisch could play both spots. You may get some reps from Donovan Heinisch at defensive tackle and nose guard. And, you know, the rest of the defense has been really good this year. And Al Golden being at the top of his game, I mean, that first 3.5 quarters was a masterclass in defense. I thought, with him calling the defense against Indiana. So I think you still have a lot of good assets there. You just rather have them with Riley Mills. But I think, that there is an encouraging amount of talent and an encouraging amount of coaching that can happen in this game. How's that, Gunner?
I think that's good, Tyler. Yeah, I think someone that not playing defensive tackle, but I would like to see have a big game or impact the game more than I think he has, is Joshua Burnham. That is someone that I expected to have played a bigger role, but I think his ankle injury and moving back and forth and maybe hasn't allowed for him to make the impact that I thought he would this year. He's certainly played a lot, but it seems like the second half of the season there haven't been a lot of big time impact plays from someone like Joshua Burnham, and maybe the extra time off between games since the end of the season and then between Indiana and Georgia, maybe that can help someone like Joshua Burnham and allow him to take his game to a high level in a big game.
You wonder if he ever got healthy, because remember that first game that he came back, it was like Marcus was like, boy, I didn't even know if he was going to play. And he said, I'm playing, coach. And it was like,
right.
Do you ever have time to completely get healthy? I wouldn't be surprised if after the season, maybe there was a cleanup there, but yeah, you're right. Josh Burnham, I'll tell you who has been playing well lately is Junior Tuihalamaka. I mean, you look at his Pro Football Focus grades and he has graded out very well. And another guy that stepped up in the Indiana game was Drake Bowen. He played a lot of snaps, and he was Notre Dame's top-rated defender in that game.
And Bryce Young had some flashes too. I think we can't forget to mention him. I really like some of what he can do, especially as a pass rusher around off the edge. I'm sure there's issues with consistency there as a young player, but if you give one sack, like you'll take that, right? Like that's a big boost from a position of need. And
it was in a big situation too.
Yeah, it was a big situation in the Indiana game when Bryce Young had his sack. All right, Outbound says, do you think the playbook opens completely up against Georgia? I have a feeling we have some things we haven't needed to use yet.
Georgia is the second worst, I think, team in the playoff field in pass efficiency defense. They may be the worst. And again, you have to how you had to add some context to IU's numbers. You have to do it with Georgia's too, given that they faced Texas quarterbacks twice. They faced Ole Miss. They faced Alabama. So they played some Tennessee. They played some pretty good offenses. But their pass efficiency number, you wonder if that's an opening for Riley Leonard to do some different things that he didn't do against Indiana. So that'll be interesting. But the common threads with Georgia in the games where they lost or they were challenged was they got outrushed badly. And then they're turnover prone. They lost the turnover battle in both the Ole Miss and the Alabama game. So that's not exactly answering your question. I'm just trying to size up what Georgia does well, what it doesn't do well. I don't know that. I think opening completely up, I don't know that that's the right thing against anybody. I think you want to see what a team does well and where you can attack them and use those pages of the playbook.
Yeah, and I think for Notre Dame, it's been a lot of what does Notre Dame do well too. Like,
right.
I'm sure there are plenty of plays that Mike Denbrock could add, but that maybe Riley Leonard isn't good at doing, or maybe they don't have the receivers to do, or fully have success doing, or maybe even Georgia's linebackers are too good to get away with running that play or something like that. So I think there will certainly be different wrinkles for this game, and I don't get the sense that Notre Dame's been holding a lot back in terms of offensive creativity. Certainly, you always have different things that you're looking for the right opportunities to do, or sometimes you'll call something that maybe is creative if it's open, but if the pre-snap read doesn't allow for it, then you don't even actually get to see what that looks like. So I think I don't think Notre Dame's going to be holding back certainly against Georgia, but also it has to play with itself and play stuff that it can execute at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was really telling to me in the post-game press conferences was both the IU defensive coordinator and their head coach really praised Riley Leonard and how difficult he was to deal with. Some of that was getting rid of pressure, but some of it was he wasn't trying to go down the field when there was coverage, that he was taking the shorter passes and what was given it to him. And that was frustrating for them. They wanted him to chuck it down the field.
Yeah.
So again, sometimes you have to look at Georgia's defense. I mean, they've got 2 All-Americans at least on their team, 2 that I voted for on various teams. Malachi Starks and Jalen Walker are tremendous. And so there's some very good talent. And you remember the 2017 game, Tyler. Brandon Wimbush ran on just about everybody against Georgia. Whew, those linebackers were running at a different speed.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. JP says, do you think KVA plays versus Georgia? What % would you put on it?
I'll let you do the math question there first.
I don't. I mean, I think he might. I would probably put 55%. I don't feel very strongly about that. He's definitely going to play. Like, I think this is the week that they're going to have a better indication of whether or not he can play, with him getting a chance to practice. I think if he does play, I don't think he's going to be like, which he wasn't in the first place, an every down player. So I think he would be limited in the amount of snaps he would be able to do. So I think he had a serious, not that required surgery, but an issue that needed to have time to heal, and we'll see what sort of explosiveness he has now coming back and what that looks like. So I would say more likely than not that he'll play, but only slightly. I don't know that it's like a guarantee that he's going to play.
Yeah, I don't even know how to put a number on that, but here's what I maybe can help you, and then you can come up with your own number, is you do have 4 linebackers who are really capable. And again, if you're playing your nickel as much as Notre Dame plays Jordan Clark, then those 4 linebackers aren't going to be over-repped. And then you have to ask yourself, if KVA is limited, is he better limited than any of those 4 are at full go? And I'm not sure that there's an answer now. When KV's at his best, there's some things he does better than the other linebackers. But if he's limited, I think that's what you kind of got to ask yourself. Why not wait and save him for when he is at his best, if you have that opportunity?
Zeno says, do you think we can stop the Georgia run without Mills?
I don't know. I mean, I think stop it. I mean, again, they're the worst rushing team in the playoff field. In the 12 teams, they were by far the worst. But Trevor Etienne wasn't playing at the end of the year. He is now. That's a big lift for them. And I think they're going to lean more into their run game, and Notre Dame's going to have to be able to deal with it, because I think Gunnar Stockton is going to express the dual threat traits that he was recruited for out of high school. We haven't seen a lot of that in him playing the Steve Angeli role the past couple years. He's come in, thrown more, hasn't done a lot of running, but I think it's in his game to do that. And I think Notre Dame has to be prepared for it. So he will be part of that running game, where Carson Beck wouldn't necessarily have been part of that running game.
Go ahead.
I think there's a lot of other elements that makes Notre Dame's run defense what it is. But again, I mean, they are not an elite run defense. That's statistically the weakest part of their defense is their run defense. They were pretty good against IU, but that's why it's hard for me to say stop them. Can they make it so that Gunnar Stockton has to win the game with his arm? I think that's what this game sets up being about, is whether Notre Dame's run defense is good enough to do that without Riley Mills. I would say probably, but to put it into, I'm not saying that they'll beat Georgia, although I think that's eventually where I'll go with this. But I think they're going to be able to put Georgia in that position where Georgia has to play kind of uncomfortable on offense at times.
Yeah, I would describe it as more like Notre Dame limiting the run rather than stopping the run. Like I don't think Notre Dame's going to sort of lock down on Georgia's run game in a way that Georgia has to abandon it. I don't think it's going to. The defensive performance against the run will be that lights out that it will necessitate that without Riley Mills. I think that's too tall of a task. And if Notre Dame's doing that, maybe it's having to use resources that maybe make it vulnerable on the outside in the passing game. So I think Notre Dame's going to have its hands full, even though Georgia hasn't been a statistically dominant running offense. I think the running game is trending in the right direction for Georgia with its running backs getting healthy, and then the threat of Stockton as a runner as well.
Georgia's been over 150 yards rushing twice this year. Against UMass, they were over 200, just a little bit. And Tennessee Tech, 166. Everybody else below 150. Against Alabama, they ran for 80. Against Ole Miss, they ran for 59. Ole Miss was the number one team in rushing defense for most of the year. Indiana actually passed them right at the end of the year after they played Purdue, which helps everybody's statistics, including Notre Dame's.
Will Christian Gray be able to hold up on the handful of 50-50 balls he will see? That question's from Chris Ayers.
Christian Gray had a pretty good season, and he had a real rough day against USC, and some of that was coming back against Army. He didn't have a great game against IU, but didn't he have Surratt most of the time, Tyler?
I'm not certain.
I'm pretty sure that Surratt was the guy he was matched up on, and Surratt is really good. He was like second team All Big Ten, which with 152 teams, that's pretty good when you're second team All Big Ten. But I think Christian Gray, he's got the length, he's got the athleticism, he's got the speed to battle. If he's mentally right, I think he'll do okay against Georgia's passing game. I'm not saying, he's going to look like Ben Morrison, but I think Christian Gray I think the USC game was the outlier in his season.
Yeah, by nature, like, you can't win all, you can, but it's unlikely that you're going to win all the 50-50 balls. Like, a receiver's going to make some plays on you. That's going to happen. But I trust Christian Gray to be able to hold up against Georgia for the most part. Will he give up some completions here or there? Probably. But I think Notre Dame will be prepared for that and provide help if needed. And we'll see if Georgia has the playmakers at receiver and the quarterback that can make the throws to be able to do that as well.
They had a bunch of interceptions this season. Not a lot lately, but in the middle of the season. 3 against Florida, 3 against the first Texas, 2 Mississippi State, 3 against Alabama. So somebody's not getting the 50-50 balls for them.
All right, Rajon says, have you seen the Alabama Jones clip from ESPN on Friday? Any thoughts?
I have not.
I think this is in reference to Shane Gillis making a joke about Nick Saban, and he was joking about how Alabama and other SEC programs were paying guys before NIL was a thing. And I think Shane Gillis, who was a comedian, was having a good time, and it got very kind of awkward on the set in that moment. And I think it was fine. He was just making a joke. I also don't think it's anything that anyone else would like. It's not that far of a leap to think that players at Alabama received money at certain points during Nick Saban's tenure. You can say that for most schools, for the record. Like, I don't think that's just specific to Alabama, and not just specific to the SEC either. I think everyone wants to be holier than thou, but I don't think they are. So I think with how quickly NIL has exploded, I don't think that's a coincidence that all these people were ready to pay players when who could have ever have thought they would have been doing that before.
And I want to say something to Rajon too, real quick. I think Rajon was one of the people that were on with us live at 1:20 a.m. when Bob Morton and I did Into the End Zone. So thank you and everybody else that showed up for that. I thought we were going to have an empty room, and there were a bunch of people on there. So thank you, and thank you for asking questions when we were really under-caffeinated.
JP says, will Severino, I believe you mean Sevano, play, and can he have an impact? I believe he's a space eater inside. Merry Christmas to you and yours.
I think of the next tier of guys, I think he's at the top of that. But I don't know that this is where you want to test him in a playoff game. I think I would rely on that rotation of 4 interior linemen that have played and trust them, and Sean can be your scout team player of the week. But I do like where he's going. He does have a different body type than the other guys on the team, and I do like his future. And Merry Christmas to you.
All right. Brian Habermill says, like the Anilius Williams third down package a lot, can that grow, or do you see Endy sticking with 2 backs for Georgia?
I think Aeneas Williams is in the thick of things now. In the Indiana game, I believe it was almost an even split in terms of reps between those three. Jeremiah Love had one fewer rep than Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams did. So I think Aeneas Williams is right in the thick of things. Now, will he play as much as against Georgia? Probably not, because in addition to coming back from the knee injury, Jeremiah Love had flu-like symptoms. His voice dropped about 4 octaves. So he was really not close to 100%. So they tried to conserve his. He only got 8 carries in that game. But sorry about that. But I do think Aeneas Williams has earned the trust of the coaches. I think we'll see Aeneas Williams against Georgia.
Yeah, I don't. It's not as much that the package grows. It's just the package continues to be a part of the game plan. He is Notre Dame's third down back for the most part, and I think he will continue to be that. So I don't think Notre Dame is sticking with 2 backs, because I don't think it has stuck with 2 backs for much of the season for quite some time now. It's been a 3-back job. Obviously, Aeneas Williams is mostly limited to third downs, but I like when he gets the ball in his hands. I mean, it seems like every time he gets the ball, whether it's a reception or a run, it's 6 yards. And so maybe sometimes it's because it's third and long and he's just getting some cheaper yardage, but I think he has earned his role and will continue to be a part of Notre Dame's offense. I was looking up Elijah Surratt, who was covering him. I don't know. I don't have the numbers by snaps, but in terms of targets, he actually was targeted 3 times with Leonard Moore covering him and just once with Christian Gray. Now that Christian Gray could have been on him more and just they didn't target him then, but I don't think Christian Gray was running all over the field following him the whole time. All right, let's get back to some of the. I want to talk a little bit more about the IU game in relation to
the crowd tonight, Gunner.
Yeah, we got a big crowd. Notre Dame's win was the first of the 4 playoff games over the weekend, and then the 3 other home teams also won their playoff matchups. Did the outcome of those other games change your perspective on Notre Dame's win over Indiana at all?
Not really. That's the best way for me to put it. Not really. Yeah. I thought they all controlled the game. They all used the home field advantage well, and the best teams won in every instance. Yeah. Was I surprised at some of I thought the closest game was the Texas Clemson game, even though the final score of Notre Dame Indiana ended up being closer. I think that was the most competitive of the 4.
I've been telling you that Clemson wasn't a slouch, that I wouldn't want to play Clemson. So
Judge Nails is a slouch, though. A tremendous slouch. Go ahead.
Yeah, it solidified how much of a home field advantage exists, especially in a playoff atmosphere like this. Is a big deal for these home crowds. And I mean, I think we knew that, but to see it play out that way, although Tennessee fans were puffing their chest for getting so many fans into Ohio Stadium, but they all left with their tail between their legs. So one thing that I thought it showed was that Notre Dame's offense needs to be more dynamic. It can't rely on one Jeremiah Love run to be, and a Jordan Faison pass at the end of the game. I think Notre Dame's offense is going to need to be more dynamic for it to win and get to the championship game or win the championship. That I just thought that was a little bit of a reminder seeing some of the other teams play on Saturday, because I think there are some dynamic offenses in this playoff field. What have you thought of all the second guessing that has been done on social media and on TV about who should have been in the field or who shouldn't have been in the field based on the outcome of these first round games?
I mean, they're entitled to have their opinion and they're entitled to have their premature opinion, but I think that's what it is premature. Can we just kind of wait until the whole thing's over to decide who should have been in the field and who's not? how many times have we had blowouts in semifinal games when it was a 4-team playoff? Should those teams not have been invited? There have been teams in the too. Yeah, there's teams in the men's basketball tournament that are high seeds that lose. Not a lot of number 1 seeds, but there's 2, 3, and 4s, 5s that have gone down in the first round. Should they have not been invited? I think just let the thing play out first and then say, okay, here's what we think can be better. But how can you I mean, unless you're playing a video game, you can't plug Ole Miss and Alabama in and see how they would have done in place of those teams. Yeah, I think the way that it worked, that Ohio State and Notre Dame, well, I mean, if you look at Oregon and Georgia, they have a lot more difficult game as the 1 and 2 seeds theoretically than do the 5 and 6 seeds in their second round games. But let's let it play all the way out and see if the right team gets crowned champion and see what these other rounds look like before we say such and such. What if Notre Dame wins the national championship and they beat teams by more? I'm not saying this will happen. I'm just saying, what if that did happen? Yeah. Then does Indiana look like such a miscast team being in the playoff? So let's just simmer down now and wait until the end of the playoff.
Yeah,
Tyler?
I tried to stay away from social media on Saturday, and I'm glad I did when I checked back in to see this is what everyone's talking about, that the people are angry about the SEC not getting in. It's like, oh, this is just so exhausting. I think it's silly. Like, if you want to get in, win your games. If you can't get into the 12-team playoff, you weren't good enough during the season. Like, there's 12 teams that get in. Like, I just don't like that is enough teams where you should have a big enough margin of error. Like, look at Notre Dame. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. It came back and won the rest of its games.
And the bottom 4 teams were the ones that lost.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to lose. That's how the seeding works. Like, that means they got it right? I mean, they ranked them in the right order. I know everyone wants to just argue about who got in or who didn't, but
what I think was, without having it play all the way out, what I think is the biggest problem, and I thought this going into the season when I saw the schedules, is these mega conferences. Now, the conference schedules aren't equitable. You know, they were like, oh, Ole Miss was like, we're not going to schedule any tough non-conference games anymore. Guess what? You didn't schedule any of them this year. Look at who they played in the non-conference. But they did play really good conference teams, but they lost to 2 unranked teams. That's why they're sitting at home or wherever bowl game that they're going to.
Mike DeVoy says FSU loses their quarterback last year and got left out of the playoff. Georgia loses their quarterback and ends up a 2 seed. SEC bias ?
Well, no, because Georgia had an automatic bid as the conference champion, so you couldn't leave them out. Could you have seeded them lower? Boy, I don't know.
I mean, you got to remember, you're seeding them against the conference champs,
right?
The other conference champs.
So your only choice to seed them lower is seed them below Boise and Arizona State. So
right,
I could see where people say, "Where's the fairness there?" But we're talking 2 different formats, and Georgia did get an automatic bid where Florida State did not. There was no such thing.
And I don't know that maybe it was known, but it wasn't as cut and dry that Carson Beck was definitely out.
It wasn't known or even rumored until after the decision had been made. I mean, they made it pretty murky, and then our rival site.
It helps that it was the game was the day before like he got hurt the day before, so there wasn't a lot of time for the committee to find out what Carson Beck's long-term
and the backup played well in that game. And the guy's name is Gunner, not Tyler Stockton.
All right. Let's quickly go through some of the things that you like about Notre Dame in this matchup against Georgia, and then what should Notre Dame be concerned about, and then we can wrap things up here.
I mean, again, Georgia's numbers are skewed because of who they played, but I mean, I went back and looked at their last 3 years, and especially on defense, this team doesn't look anything like those. You're usually used to seeing them in single digits in almost every defensive category. I'll give you a rundown real quick of their defense. Run defense, 36. Pass efficiency defense, 41. Total defense, 35. Scoring defense, 23. Red zone defense, 67. On offense, 98th in rush offense, 46 in total offense, 51 in sacks allowed, 64th in third downs, 74th in turnovers lost. That doesn't make them a bad team or even a just above average team, but there are some fault lines to take advantage of. And I think when you look at Notre Dame's rush offense versus Georgia's rush defense, if Jeremiah Love doesn't have flu-like symptoms and can carry it more than 8 times, I like Notre Dame in that matchup. I like Notre Dame's not great passing prowess against Georgia's 41st ranked pass efficiency defense. The only team that's below them is Boise at 88. But I mean, on the other side of the bracket, Ohio State 4, Oregon 5, Texas 2. So, I mean, there are places where Notre Dame's favorably matched up. I think that's why you see a small betting line right now with Georgia being, I think, a 1.5 point favorite. And that's actually moved. Notre Dame started as the favorite. You look at special teams, and the one thing that Georgia did really well was punting. They were 3rd in the country in net punting, and their punters out for that. So I think there's places Notre Dame can take advantage, but Georgia is still a really talented, really well-coached team that's been on big stages and knows how to act there. How about you, Tyler?
I mean, I think you hit on all those things. Like the inexperienced quarterback, like is big. Like it is an unknown, but I just feel like that does not seem like a formula for success against Notre Dame's defense. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. It hasn't
been with other people's backup quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Georgia Tech played a backup.
Yeah.
Sure, they would have loved to have Haynes King.
And
but that Georgia Tech game too, Tyler, showed you some of the things that Haynes King does, Riley Leonard does, and Georgia Tech had good success against Georgia. I mean, that was an 8-5 game.
Yeah, and Georgia Tech end up 47 rushes for 260 yards and 3 touchdowns, with 5.5 yards per carry there. So yeah, I think Notre Dame should be able to run the ball with some success. I do think Georgia's rush offense is going to be better than it has been.
I do too.
And like you mentioned, all those defensive numbers, like I think it's fair to say that Georgia doesn't have a great defense. Like Georgia does not have a great defense. I think that's fair to say. I think it's probably still a good defense despite some of those numbers.
They have some really good pieces.
Yeah, some really good players. And they've played some good teams. And I think, like, I don't know, when I'm just looking through the national rankings, like, it doesn't bother me if they're 35th in total defense when they play in the SEC, because, like, there could be teams in the Big Ten that, I mean, look, like IU, for instance. Do we think IU's defense is better than Georgia's? I don't know that I would say that. But statistically, it's better than Georgia in almost every way. So, like, I think Georgia's been tested way more than IU has been. And so that is some of the reason I think there is some concern. I mentioned what Georgia did to Texas's offensive line. It seems like Georgia, despite its quarterback injury, like, I think maybe Georgia's getting healthier at the right time of the year with some of its players, whereas maybe Notre Dame's trending in the opposite direction. So that could be a concern. Lastly, what do you think is a bigger loss, Riley Mills for Notre Dame or Carson Beck for Georgia?
That was a hard one. That made my head hurt. I'm going to say it's pretty even, but I actually think Carson Beck is the bigger loss there. But I think it's pretty even because Riley Mills is exactly what Notre Dame needs in a game like Georgia. I do want to jump on one thing, and I'll let you answer that too. But SEC defenses, and again, these teams didn't all play the same teams. This is the national ranking in total defense of SEC teams. Texas was 3rd. Tennessee was 4th. Uh, South Carolina was 15th. Missouri was 22nd. So, I mean, there's a handful of them that were better than Georgia. Auburn was ranked ahead of them. Alabama was ranked ahead of them. So they're about halfway down. But again, they played a better schedule than anybody else in the SEC in terms of really good teams.
Yeah.
So what did you think? Who's the bigger loss in your mind?
Yeah, I would side with Beck too. I know he did some harm for Georgia with the turnovers he did, but he still made the passing game a threat. And I think allowed Georgia to get to this point in the season without having the dynamic running game that it would like to have. So I still think he is a bigger loss than Riley Mills, though I do think really Riley Mills is an extremely massive loss for Notre Dame. Chris W. had a question I wanted to throw at you. Eric, what was that hard-hitting question you asked at the Marcus Freeman presser?
About the wide receivers not wearing their shirts out for the warm-ups. and he gave me an answer that I was able to use in my column, which I loved.
He enjoyed that. All right. One last thing before we go, a recruiting reminder, which we hinted at earlier. 2026 four-star offensive lineman Ben Nichols is announcing his commitment decision tomorrow, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Notre Dame is one of 4 finalists alongside Wisconsin, Penn State, and Tennessee. I think Notre Dame has a pretty good shot here. So if you're looking for some good Christmas Eve news, you may be able to receive some. Keep an eye on InsideNDSports.com for coverage of that if that comes through. Anything else you want to get to before we get out of here, Eric?
I always like to thank Piano Man Steve Lundgren for our theme music. Thank you for anybody that said it looks lighter in Eric's. I invested in a light to make it lighter in here. And I want to thank everybody who showed up live. This is the biggest live audience I can remember us ever having. We are going to be back next Monday night to do this all over again, and hope you guys will join us.
All right. Yes. Thank you for everyone. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Head to our video description if you're interested in giving a gift subscription to InsideNDSports.com, or if you want to try out a subscription of your own for the first time. Santa says to subscribe to us here on YouTube as well, and enjoy your week.